So we're going to take a look at last year in Service and some of the major features that have been added to different portions of the system. There's a smattering of everything here, and we're not going to just walk through the changelog, although if you'd like to do that, you can always do that. Using the Need Help button, if you search for the term changelog or change or any of those sorts of things, you'll see that pop up. I personally prefer to view this as a separate page, although of course you can use it in that little box. And so if you want to run through kind of all of the changes, you're welcome to do that. You can just scroll back through this. What we're going to do today is kind of hit the highlights of particular features. And we're not going to do this chronologically. We're going to try to do this in a little bit more of a logical manner. So we're going to start off with the subject of volunteer signups and what new features and options exist as you're getting your opportunities posted and ready for your volunteers to register and actually moving them through that process. So after that, we'll go through managing events, some of the changes that were presented in there, and how to utilize those and kind of capitalize on some of the updates that we've created there. And then finally, we'll go through reporting updates. So different searches that are available, different reports that are available as well. Okay, so within the subject of volunteer signups and posting your opportunities for volunteers, hopefully you've already noticed this change. I think it's a very useful change. And that would be when you search your opportunities rather, you will see on the right-hand side a status indicator that tells you right now, is this event being published? So you can see obviously the status of the event. This is open, but this will also tell you whether or not the event is currently being published by the color of this icon or kind of a mixture of different textures in here. So we can see if this is fully green, this event is being published. It's publicly available. Volunteers can see and sign up for this on their own, obviously assuming they meet whatever restrictions are in place. If you see kind of a gray bars in there as well, or gray stripes on half of that, that means this event is open. People could ostensibly register for it, but not necessarily everyone. There might be some kind of stipulation in place. So if we hover over this one, we can see that it tells us what the stipulation is. And in particular for this event, I'm not going to read this whole blurb, but basically this event has a restriction and that's limiting visibility. So this will tell you what is happening. Why is this event not being published? This is an excellent place to check first. If someone has said, hey, why can't I see this event? You can go and just check, is the event actually being published? Is there a reason that the event isn't publicly visible? So that's an excellent tool for kind of just quickly checking, are your events published, or is there something barring it from being published? And then of course, that'll give you more information to go and take care of that. Another change in the volunteer sign-up process is the addition of clickable links in custom registration questions. So for example, I have this Trails and Waterways event here. When a volunteer is signing up for this event, I need them to know how to use mobile sign-in because I want them to do this remotely. I'm not going to have a tablet set up for them when they get there. And so what I've done is I've included on this event a custom question that asks them, have you reviewed the video tutorial on how to use mobile sign-in? This is a required field, and they have to say yes to this. If they say no to it, it'll actually give them a failure message that says, hey, click on that link. So the link that's in here just points to a YouTube video on this subject. Obviously, this is a very specific example. You can use this in whatever manner you want to, but the point is these links now can be clickable in those questions. So if we look at my roster for the event, and I were to kind of simulate how a volunteer answers this. So this is the way it would be presented to a volunteer as well. You can see that they have the question here. They have the link to that YouTube video, which opens in a new window. So when they click on that, it goes to that page. But basically I'm asking them, did you review this video? If they say no, in my case, I've made a failure message that says, hey, you got to click on that first. So then they would need to change that to yes and then go ahead and sign up. So that's just a change that's been made to the custom registration questions. Basically, you just put a URL in the question and the system will make that a clickable link that opens in a new window. So for transferring over information or tutorials or like people have to review a training before they sign up, then this is a nice way to kind of require that or at least push it as people are registering. Okay, moving right along here. I want to talk about the sign-in console for a little bit and some changes that have been made to that. So in particular, you now have the option to have volunteers verify their profile information through the sign-in console. So if you have like a kiosk set up at a location and you have done that require verification information, so we've talked about this with the refreshing volunteer database, but basically if you go in and do a bulk update and require your volunteers to update their profiles, normally this needs to take place on their account, on their own phone, at home, at work, kind of operating on their own device. But now if we've set this for a volunteer and then we open the sign-in console in a specific manner, you need to select that yes, you want to allow verification in this sign-in console device. With this turned on, there's a big warning here that says, hey, you should probably be present to watch this happening, because normally the sign-in console doesn't expose any volunteer information, whereas in this case, it will allow them to see their profiles. So I would recommend, or we would recommend, that you are physically present when you allow this to happen. But essentially, when someone signs in for their shift now, if you've required that they verify their profile, they'll have to do that before they can sign in for their shift. So this is an option now. You can kind of modify your workflow that way. All right. The next thing to do kind of with the sign-in console actually is on an event by event basis, you can actually choose to set whether or not a particular event allows walk-ins. So when you're creating a new event, there's an option towards the bottom under the advanced options that says allow walk-in registration for this opportunity via the sign-in console or kiosk. So if you've ever run into the scenario where you want walk-in registration turned on for your system as a whole, but there's particular events where you don't really want that to even be presented, that's what this option does. If you set this to no for an event or for a project, then it will never show up as a walk-in opportunity. So volunteers wouldn't be able to just walk in register. Walk-in registration still requires that volunteers meet the requirements for an event. So they can't necessarily just sign up for things willy-nilly. They still have to meet whatever requirements are in place. But this would just bar this particular event from even showing up as an option for walk-in. Okay, we're going to switch over to managing your opportunities and some of the new features that were added in that realm this calendar year. So the first thing I want to point out is that now with service projects, you might have noticed that you can enable reminder emails. So previously this was not an option because service projects don't really have registration times or specific dates associated with them. But they do have the ability to create schedules. Now, schedules within service projects is not necessarily itself a new feature. This is just kind of a companion piece to that. Just a kind of brief reminder on what schedules are. If we click into a service project here, there's a menu item that says Manage Service Project Schedules. Now we're actually going to be doing a webinar on service projects, and we'll kind of run through all of this in more detail a little bit later next month. But I do want to point out, so let's say, I have a regular person or a regular volunteer. This is a coaching program in this case. These people show up on a regular basis, and I just want to be able to see that in my calendar and have some kind of way to visualize that. That's basically what this does. So I have a couple people already scheduled out here. You can create new schedules up at the top, and then you can repeat these in a similar manner to time slot events. So it's actually really easy to maintain this. But with these schedules in place, I now have kind of an arrangement with this person. Now this is a list view. There is also a calendar view version of this later, or that we'll go through later, not today. But with this kind of schedule, this person is scheduled to be here on Saturdays. So I could set up this service project to send reminder emails, one day before, and then this person will be emailed every Friday saying, hey, don't forget you're scheduled for tomorrow. So it kind of serves as the same sort of reminder as reminder emails for time slot events or normal events, but it only interacts with these service project schedules. Okay, and then speaking of the calendar, there's a few changes that have been made to the calendar itself. Just in terms of visually and how you navigate this, there's some more buttons up here at the top of the page. You can view more months now in the calendar itself. You can pick a particular month and then choose through a whole host of years. So if you want to look back historically or forecast things, you can do that and then just go to that particular month. And then this calendar view now has a few toggles, so you can include or not service projects. So service projects, if they're just persisting, can often be a really large block on the calendar. By default, they are excluded. So you can toggle that to choose to show them or not. You can also choose to include registration detail here. So if I actually want to see who was registered, not just a number, I can click on this view registration detail and see all of those names listed in here. And then in the print option, there's a few more options here now. So if we click on print calendar, it brings up a new page. And in here, I can say show the entire month, or I can say only show one of the weeks. So you could do first, second, third, fourth, fifth, or sixth. You'll notice it does show an entire week as well. So if we go to like the 6th week or the fifth, maybe the 5th week is a better example in this case. You can see it's showing, the end of December, but also the start of January. So it's showing a full week at a time. But you can select a particular week and then print out that specific week as a calendar view. So if you have like a billboard or a corkboard where you post this kind of information on like a weekly basis, you could print it out for the week with the rosters in there. Now, obviously, if you're printing it, things might change during the week, but you can at least do a week at a time now as opposed to the entire month if you want to do a printout like that. And you can see this is also carrying over the fact that I don't want my service project names displayed, but I do want to see the names of the registrants for each shift. Okay, a couple more things with managing your opportunities, along with the idea that you can individualize which events show up for walk-ins. You can also individualize particular sign-out or automatic sign-out times for service projects. There's a global setting in your system configuration for automatic sign-outs. So if someone neglects to sign out for a service project using the sign-in console, then you can have them assigned a default number of hours. But there's also a separate setting now on every service project. So if this particular event, people typically stick around for 3.5 hours, I can set this to override the system default, which I think in my case is 2 hours, right? So you can make this a separate number if a particular project, people usually stay super late, or maybe conversely, it's a very short project or a short engagement. So you can set separate defaults. Again, this is for service projects only. That's kind of an unnecessary feature for time slot events or normal events because they all have their own number of default hours to begin with. Okay, but speaking about normal events and time slot events, there is also a new setting which is intended to automate the process of marking no-shows. It's not something that is deployed by default, and you want to be cautious when and where you use this. But if you are consistently using the sign-in console and ensuring that volunteers both sign in when they arrive and sign out when they leave, or perhaps just sign in, but if you're really kind of particular about making people sign in when they get there for a shift, you can use the tool to bulk mark no-shows. I could select multiple events here and say I want to mark some no-shows. You can always do this on a weekly or daily basis. But if you're very particular with a certain event or specific events about making sure that people use the sign-in console, you can now set up an event. So if we go into update this time slot event, down at the bottom under the advanced options, there's a setting that says automatically mark no-shows. There's a big warning here that says don't do this unless you know what you're doing. But basically this is set to no by default. If you turn this on, what the system will do is after this event ends, so in this case, this is a time slot event that occurs on like a daily basis. So after each shift, the system will mark anybody who did not sign in as a no-show. So again, if you're very good about, or if your volunteers are very good about signing in for their shifts, at least, they don't necessarily have to sign out, but if they're very good about signing in when they are there, then this can basically just remove a step from the process for you. If your volunteers are not very good about signing in, I would not turn this on, because then you're going to have to go back through and re-register people for this event, because the system is going to be marking them as no-shows automatically. So again, this really depends on the event and on your volunteers, whether or not they're good about using the sign-in console or mobile sign-in every time they participate in this shift. But this can obviously remove a step from you or from kind of what you're doing if that is the case. Okay, and then one last kind of new feature about events, and then we'll switch gears here to reporting. And that would be that events now get marked as archived after a fixed number of years. This is a setting. We touched on this in refreshing your database. It's kind of relevant to that as well. But after the default is 5 years, your events will automatically get marked as archived. Archived events are still in your database. You can still run searches for them. You can still run reports on that information. And by default, when you run a report that just includes a date range, it will include your archived events. So unless you've searched to exclude them, then they will still be in those reports. But what it does basically is it cleans up kind of your standard searches, right? So if you're looking for an event by name, maybe you have a lot of events with the same name or with the same word in the title, and there's years worth of history there. Your archived events won't by default show up then when you search by like that name or that keyword. Right? So if the same event happening 10 years in a row and you want to search for last year's version of it, you could search by the name of the event and your archived ones wouldn't show up normally in that search. So again, the system will mark that automatically. It is a setting in your system configuration. So if we go to the Edit System Configuration, under System Management, there's a section for Opportunity Management Settings. And in here, you can set automatically mark opportunities as archived. The default is after 5 years. You can choose anywhere from after 1 year to after 10 years, or you can set this to never if you don't want that to trigger at all. Okay, we have one more kind of set of updates for the year to run through, and that would be changes to searching and reporting. And there's some pretty exciting ones in here, in my opinion, specifically when we talk about identifying volunteers that have been interacting with you. So if we go into the volunteer database side and specifically into running an advanced search, there's a new search in here for finding volunteers based on when they completed their first activity with you, and then also when they participated in their most recent activity. So this, you could think of this search, find volunteers that participated in their most recent service activity between 2 dates. You can think of this as when were they last in the doors. So when was this person last present at an event? So I think this is a particularly useful search for finding volunteers that you might want to try to re-engage. You can search for volunteers who haven't been here in a while, so when were they last physically here. You can combine this, of course, with other searches, like if they've completed a registration in a certain time frame, so to preclude the idea that someone is signed up for something next week, right? Or you can find volunteers that have a registration in a certain time frame as well. But this is just a nice way to find, okay, when was someone last physically here at an event? And this piece of data is stored on the volunteer's profile as well. So you can view that information on a volunteer's account. You can see that data on their profile directly. So when were they last here? And then this can also be exported. So you can include this in all kinds of printouts. You can include this on this page. If you download a spreadsheet, you can tick a box to include that field. You can also include that field in the opportunity management side. When you create an event, you can include it in the sign-in sheet itself. So if we go into update an event and the additional organizer options, you can include that data in the sign-in sheet. And of course, you can have this sign-in sheet automatically sent to you, and it'll tell you when were people most recently there. You can include that data in your notification of registrations or cancellations. So if you want to get an email every time someone signs up for this event, and that email tells you when was the last time this person was here, you can turn that on here. You can also choose to turn that on your registration listing page. So we can select that in here, the last service activity date. The benefit of doing this, let me just turn that on and show you real quick. Now, if I go and look at my roster for this event or my registration listing page, I can see to the right of everyone's name, well, when was the last time they were actually here? So if they were here recently, obviously we get that kind of picture. Or if it's been a long time since they've been here, we would see that date reflected here. So it's just kind of a useful tool to keep track of or kind of keep tabs on, how often is this person working here? Were they here recently? Am I going to need to retrain them? Has it been years since they've been here? You can kind of at a glance see that now. Okay, so obviously that can be included in a lot of different reports. And then I want to mention a few other kind of changes to reports or additions to reporting as well. So if we go into the report management tool, you have the ability now under the retention report. So volunteer retention report, you can apply a query. So maybe you want to view, volunteers who, stuck around within a particular category, right? A lot of times your events might be pretty compartmentalized. You have regular volunteers who do this type of opportunity, but never really touch that type of opportunity. So you could run a search for a set of events or a set of volunteers, and then gauge how well you retain people through that type of opportunity, or are they coming back into that type of opportunity? So this is a really powerful tool for just evaluating your database and seeing where your volunteers are going. Are they sticking around? Let me show an example of this spreadsheet and then talk about kind of what these searches do to affect it. So I'm going to leave this as all volunteers, all opportunities. If we run this report, this basically just gives us a snapshot of our attendees. So how many people for each of these different time frames, and then the percentage that they returned within those different years, right? So if we had run a search for a particular type of opportunity, then we would see how many people joined for that opportunity or participated for that opportunity in that calendar year. And then in the subsequent years, the percentage of those people that returned into that same category is basically what this search is doing. So it's essentially just parsing out the database by specific sets of events or sets of volunteers and giving us, okay, how many of them are coming back year over year. So it gives you a really good idea of how well people are sticking around. Okay, and then there's one last search that I know I did point out, but it's worth pointing out again. And that would be in the advanced volunteer search under the participation options. You have the ability to find volunteers that participated or will participate in their first activity between these two dates. So this is just an excellent way to see, who are your new volunteers showing up this week, or who are your new volunteers that showed up last month. You can use this as a comparison tool, as like a recruiting tool, and understanding the ebb and flow of volunteers, but also just to identify like, hey, these are the new people coming in this week, and have like that list printed out for you if you want to provide kind of like a warmer welcome for your new volunteers and introduce them to your system a little bit more effectively. So this will basically just identify people whose first registration falls within this date range, whether again, it's in the past or if it's in the future. Okay, and as always, with any search you run, that can always be turned into a report, and you can print out that information, or you can just use that to engage your volunteers directly. So we've had a lot of changes added into the system this year. Again, if you want to walk through what all of those updates are, you can do so just by going through the changelog, which you can use the need help tool to search for changelog or change and find that here, and then just run through those changes. You should also see a message up at the top of the page every time we push an update, about once a month, and you can click into the changelog from there as well. So if you want to peruse through everything, if you have questions about anything you see in there, of course, feel free to reach out to our customer support team. We are delighted to be working with you, and thanks for kind of tuning in for this a little bit longer webinar on a couple different subjects here. But if you have any questions, if there's anything that we can do for you, please let us know. So thanks for your time. Hope you have a wonderful holiday season, and we'll see you in the new year.